Okay, we go on and we move now into a question concerning why Kuffah. What's the problem with Kuffah? What's the problem with the Hafs text coming from Kuffah? And again, this is from Abdiquadri, and he asks this question. Hafs is from Kuffah, he admits that. So what, he asks. The pre-uthmanic manuscripts of Kufans were burnt. How does that affect the post-uthmanic renditions? Also, conflating or combining the oral tradition and the textual tradition is rather disingenuous. Let me start with the latter, then go to the former. The idea of conflating the oral and the textual tradition. This is not us. We're not the ones that are saying that. It's Muslims that say that all the time. You hear this all the time. Who cares if there's no textual tradition? Who cares if we don't have the original text? Though they claim it all the time, they do. But who cares if you found out that we don't have it, that it hasn't been preserved? We know that orally it was memorized, and so the oral tradition always existed and always will remain, and that oral tradition still exists even today. They memorized it back then, and they can still memorize it today. And what they're usually doing, there's two problems with this. The first thing is they're saying we have hundreds and thousands of people that memorize it today, therefore we have an oral tradition that goes all the way back. No, you don't. You only have an oral tradition that goes back to 1924, because what they're memorizing today is from 1924. The Hafs text. Are people in North Africa memorizing the same way that people around the rest of the world are? No, they're not. Because if you have someone who has contests, memorization contests anywhere in the world, and you have someone stand up there and do a memorization that comes from the Hafs, and then right after you have someone who comes up and does a memorization from the Warsh, there are going to be 5,000 differences. Who's going to win the contest? So even today, you don't have that. And this is a misnomer, this is a misunderstanding by lots of Muslims. You have so many differences between the Hafs and all the others, 93,000 differences, that you cannot even say that today it's been memorized correctly. It has been memorized for those of you who are using the Hafs, because that's all you've heard is the Hafs. 95% of all Muslims use the Hafs, so that's why the vast majority do use the Hafs. But that's only been around, folks, for 96 years, excuse me. It's not even been around a century. We're talking about 1,400 years ago. What did they memorize 1,400 years ago? And now that gets into the second problem, and that is, what about the Qurayshi dialect? This Qurayshi dialect that was chosen by Uthman there in 652 as the dialect that was the standard dialect, because that's the one that was used in the Hijaz, the central part of Arabia. That was the one that was used in Mecca and Medina. Therefore, that would have been the dialect that Muhammad received. That would have been the one that he recited. That would be the one that was then given and then orally recited by those around him. Now, I am aware, this is true, this is what Muslims always remind me of, and it comes from Al-Bukhari, that there were 6 other dialects that were then revealed to Muhammad via the angel Gabriel. But that comes from the Hadith, again, the 9th and 10th century. What 6 other dialects were there? I'd like to know what those other 6 are. Okay? Can you understand why I'm asking that question? Because did Muhammad know those 6 dialects so that he could recite those 6 dialects, so others heard those 6 dialects? And if they heard those 6 dialects, why is it that these people who were around Muhammad had not heard those 6 dialects and got so upset when they did hear those 6 dialects? Why is it that those from Mecca, Medina, when they were up in Azerbaijan, when they were fighting against the Azerbaijan, that's the modern day name for that place, by the way. People, please don't get upset with me when I use that name, otherwise you don't know what I'm talking about again. When they were there having that battle, and they were hearing other recitations, other Iraqi and also Syrian recitations, they came to blows about it. If there were all these different dialects happening and being introduced, were they all introduced by Muhammad? Were those in Iraq and in Syria, had they been down to Muhammad? Had Muhammad given them and somehow they got their different recitations that were, in the case of just 2 that we have together, are 5,000 differences? Muhammad had all those 5,000 differences. Did Muhammad know all 93,000 differences? Did he recite? Do you see how stupid this all sounds? Do you see how it just gets larger and larger and larger the more we ask these kind of questions? And that's why you need to be careful, Abdiquadri. You're saying something that you haven't really thought through. You're making claims that you really haven't really put to the test. And that's why we're going to keep testing you. We're going to keep showing you how illogical a lot of these claims are. Continuing on. The reason that Uthman, and if you, certainly you can question me on this, but the reason I believe that Uthman had the others burned, he did have the others burned according to Al-Bukhari, Volume 6, Hadith number 510. He did have those others burned. Those others were all the Iraqi and the Syrians, because that's why the problem existed, that there were other dialects. But if you burn something, and here's why I keep on getting at, this is the difficulty I'm having with your oral versus written. You cannot burn oral, so it has to be written that he had burned. Get me on this. Get me on this. This is a perfectly legitimate question for me to ask. If he had something burned, it has to be a book. You have to burn a book. You have to burn a manuscript. You have to burn parchment. You can't burn orality. By definition, you can't burn orality. I'm not being disingenuous here. You think I am? No, I'm not. That's a perfectly good question. If you still don't get it, I can't help you. Everybody else gets it but you, Qadri. So maybe this is your problem. By the way, this is not the same Dr Yasir Qadhi that we're talking. This is Abdiquadri who is writing these questions and trying to say I'm being disingenuous. Remember, at the time of the 7th century, the mid-7th century, the ijams and the harakats had not yet been created. The ijams would be the dots, and the harakats would be the vowels. They had not been created. That's why you cannot have dialectical differences in a written text that early. I've said this so many times, I don't know how many times I can say without starting to sound like a broken record. Can you see why it gets a little tiring having to repeat what I'm saying? I don't know if this Abdiquadri just doesn't get it or doesn't want to get it or is trying to use this to show supposedly that he's trying to make me look disingenuous. But I'll keep on reminding you, get your dates correct. Follow the timelines of when the ijams and the harakats were introduced. They were not there at the time of the mid-7th century. So you cannot have our good friend Uthman burning manuscripts that disagree, since there would be no disagreement. All they had was the razm at that time. All they had was the razm. And you're the one that tells me the razm was exactly the same. You're the one that keeps reminding me. All of you keep reminding me the razm was the same. The consonantal text, the 16 letters were always the same. So then why burn them? The only reason you can even have a difference is to start introducing the dots and the vowels. The 5 dots and the 3 vowels. The ijams and the harakats. Those could not have been introduced till the 8th century. Then you get back and you say, well, why is this post-uthmanic? Why should the Kuffah be a problem, post-uthmanic? In some ways, I'm doing this tongue-in-cheek. And I said, and the reason why it's a problem is, of all the 30 that they could have chosen, remember, of the 30, 22 of them were from outside of Mecca and Medina, outside of the Hijaz. Here are the 30 right here. I've got all 30 right here. And 22 of them were from Iraq, Damascus, or Cairo. All right? Those 3 places. Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. Today, Iraq, Syria, and Egypt today. I'm not going to get into the archaic names, otherwise you won't know what I'm talking about. So can you see then why only 8 of them they had at their disposal? So why, when Muhammad Ibn al-Husayni al-Haddad, when he was given the job in 1924 there in Egypt, when he was given the job to choose just one, why did he not choose one from the Hijaz? Why did he not choose Nafi, who is from Medina, or Ibn Kathir, who is from Mecca? Why did he not choose Abu Ja'far, who is from Medina, or Kalun, also from Medina, or Al-Bazi, or Kunbul from Mecca, or Ibn Isa ibn Wardan, or Ibn Jumaz from Medina? These all existed in 1924 for him to choose. No, he went instead and he chose Hafs, this one right here, Hafs, who is from Kuffah. He is from Asim, from Kuffah. So why did he choose him? Why did he not choose one of the 7 or the 10? These 10 here, which are the readers, these are the Kirat. Why did he choose the Riwayat? These were the lesser, the students, one of them. More than that, in 1985, when the Saudi Arabian government decided to make this text the text for the whole world, when they decided to make this text for all of us, everybody around the world, 1985, 35 years ago, why did they not choose something from the Hijaz, from their own country? Why did they not choose those who come from Nafi or Ibn Kathir or Abu Ja'far? Why didn't they choose one of those 3? Instead, they went to Asim from Kuffah. To me, that doesn't make sense. Because if Uthman, if he was in his own wisdom in 652, burnt all of those that didn't come from the Hijaz, burnt anything that came outside of Mecca and Medina, destroyed all of them back in 652, so that the one that was there that he then sent to the 5 different cities was the one that Muhammad received. So I'm assuming if Muhammad received it, this is the one that's in heaven, this is the eternal one, then why in the wisdom of Fahd, King Fahd, there in 1985, did he not do the same? That's all I'm asking. It's a simple question. I'm not being disingenuous, and I'm not trying to laugh at you all. I'm just trying to say, this doesn't make sense. Of all the things that the Saudi Arabian government should have done was to have chosen the one that came from their own area, because that, I'm assuming, would be closest to the Qurayshi dialect, because the Qurayshi dialect is the Hijazi dialect, which is Mecca, Medina. Now, I know that's not true, because we now know that the Arabic that we see in the Quran didn't even come from that area, but that's a whole other question for another time, for another day. I'm just asking about why, in the Qira'at, the whole problem with the Qira'at, why then was the Kufan one? Why was this guy chosen from 796, 144 years after Muhammad? He didn't even come from Muhammad's place. He didn't even come from Muhammad lived, or either of the two cities that he lived. He came from much further north and much further east. Kufa, Iraq, just southwest of what is today Baghdad, used to be Ctesiphon. Okay, that's all I'm asking. But can you see why you rather than just sit there and yell at me and call me disingenuous and call me all kinds of names and throw your barbs at me, answer the question. Please answer these questions. We need some answers, because so far all we're getting is an awful lot of ad hominem, and I'm used to it. I spent my whole career getting ad hominem. You're not going to hurt me by throwing barbs at me, but you're going to hurt all the viewers who are listening to you. They want to hear answers. So far you haven't answered any of these. God bless you. All right, this is Jay. Over and out.